Well, it's time to get a new battery for this 1991 420 SEL W126 Mercedes. And the battery in here was put in December 2007. And it is a Mercedes battery made by VRLA, which has been bought out by Johnson Controls. It's the typical BCI group size 49 battery. And this winter time has been particularly hard on this battery, and it's starting to gracefully fail. You can tell by the way that the engine cranks over, and for how long it cranks over before it starts slowing down. I've got a voltmeter hooked up to it to measure the open circuit voltage, and I've also disabled the engine to prevent it from starting up, and hopefully I'll be able to demonstrate what this thing sounds like with the battery like it is. So that's an example of how these lead-acid batteries start to fail. You had a really good open circuit voltage of 12.65, now it's around 12.4, it's starting to recover a little bit. And the engine will typically start out cranking like it normally does at the normal speed, and then rapidly start falling off to the point where it won't start at all. And if your engine's in good shape like this one is, that's pretty much not a problem. It'll go ahead and fire right up. But when it starts to sound like that, you know that your battery is beginning to fail, and you're eventually going to, probably very soon, sooner than later, going to have a catastrophic failure where it's just not going to crank over at all. And that might happen when the weather is really, really cold, like around in the 20s or 30s. Right now it's in the 50s. Or it could happen if you have some other problem. You just don't have any more reserve left in that battery. Like if you throw an alternator belt and you have to drive for a while with the headlights on, or even without the headlights on, just with the regular fuel pump and all the electronics, you've got no reserve capacity left in this battery at all. So it's really kind of dangerous to drive with it like that, and it's time for a replacement. While I have the car here at home instead of on the side of the road somewhere or in a parking lot where I can't get it started again. So we'll go ahead and turn off our voltmeter. And I'll get to the actual procedure to replace the battery in just a bit, but I want to talk a little bit about the type of battery that I chose for a replacement. This battery put in 2007. And it was made in November 2007, so approaching 6 years old, not quite 6 years old. And I'm basically in the process of converting the whole fleet over to absorbed glass mat technology. And as sort of a pilot or a trial of that technology, my first AGM battery I put into the W108, the 1970 Mercedes 280 SE. And at the time I chose the Deka Ultimate valve regulated lead acid battery. This is a Group 48 battery. Group 49 just is a little bit too large for the battery tray for this car. And I've been very pleased with this battery. I've had very good luck with it. And basically, for those that don't know, these batteries are essentially like the batteries that you find in the UPSs, uninterruptible power supplies, that you find for computers. They're just like conventional flooded lead acid batteries, but instead of having liquid acid in here, the acid is held in suspension and absorbed in these fiberglass mat separators that separate the plates. So this was the first battery that I put in 2011 and had very good luck with it. I've always liked East Penn Manufacturing, or Deka, the actual brand. And so that's what I'm going to go ahead and use that same battery company for the W126. And so we have that over here near the F250, so I could talk about it a little bit. Since 2011, they've changed the marketing a little bit, and they now call that line the Intimidator. But you can see it's still a Deka battery. For those that are into high-performance car audio, you'll recognize the Intimidator name as being one of the best batteries you can get. This battery has got 850 cold cranking amps. It's a part number 9A49, and that's 150 more cranking amps than the original Mercedes battery had. And as one of the benefits of the absorbed glass mat, it's actually a lot safer. You can actually tip the thing over without any problem at all. There's not any spillage or anything. So it's actually safer in a car accident if this battery loses integrity. You're still pretty well off. Now with the F250, that's the second absorbed glass mat battery. I chose the Odyssey battery from Enersys. This is a typical Ford battery, Group 65, that puts out 930 cold cranking amps. Very powerful battery. And some of you might ask, well, why didn't you choose the Odyssey battery when you went to buy a battery for the Mercedes? And the answer is that unfortunately Enersys does not make an exact fit battery in the Group 49 size. They make one that comes fairly close, but it's just a little bit too large. It's actually an inch longer and will not fit into the car. And the other thing is, this battery is actually more powerful cold cranking amp wise. This one carries an 850 cold cranking amp rating, and the Odyssey carried an 810 cold cranking amp rating. And what you see here, the Deka Intimidator and the Odyssey battery, both in the AGM technology, are some of the best batteries you can get. I believe this one is going to edge out the Deka just a little bit. Some of the differences are, you've got a much tougher case, and you've got tin-plated brass terminals, and you've got almost 100% pure virgin lead plates inside for the construction for the Odyssey. Over here looking at the Deka, one of the things that makes these batteries stand out from East Penn, the battery terminals are actually forged lead. That gives them a nice shiny smooth appearance. And the plates are the typical lead calcium or lead alloy, not nearly as pure as what's in the Odyssey, but definitely very well made. And then working on down, we have an older battery, the Sears Die Hard, which is also a Group 65. And you can see how the battery posts are actually somewhat porous, and the acid is allowed to leach up in here and cause corrosion all around the terminals and kind of start getting all over the battery case, get through the vent caps and run on down the side and corrode your battery tray. That's just not going to happen with the Deka at all. For one thing, the acid's immobilized, and for another thing, you have forged terminals. Same thing with the Odyssey battery. Battery leakage is just not a concern anymore. Neither is heat and neither is vibration. So both very good batteries, and I would have chosen an Odyssey battery, but I could not. What made me decide about the Intimidator is I could get an exact fit or exact OEM fit with this battery, but they're just really close together as far as quality wise. I think I'm going to get many years of life out of them. So getting back over to the W126 over here, I'm going to get set up and start removing this battery and put in the new battery. And one of the first things I have to do is disconnect these terminals so I can get the washer bottle out of here, and then start taking out the battery hold down clamps. Now this car is a little bit unique compared to some other cars in that it's equipped with the anti-theft system for the radio, like many Mercedes-Benz of that era. And it's got the original Deka radio in here. And what happens is, if the system were to lose power for any length of time, such as replacing a battery, or if the radio is taken out of the car, the radio basically goes dead, and you have to enter in a code. So to avoid, I do have the code, that's no big deal. A lot of people, when they get these cars, especially used, they lose that code, and that's why you don't see these cars very often with the original radio, because they think the radio is actually bad. But to avoid having to go through all of that, and also to avoid having the computer codes reset or anything like that, I'm going to go ahead and wire up another battery to this in parallel, just so we have continuous power. So let me get all set up and be right back. Okay, now I'm all set up. You're going to need a couple of wrenches for the battery terminals. You're going to need a 13mm and then a 10mm. I've got a separate power source that's wired to the ground of the vehicle, as well as the B+ from the alternator, to maintain power when I disconnect this battery. And with a battery this large, this is actually the remote starting kit I was using that I had in the trunk of this car, just in case I lost this battery at work or on the road or something like that. You want to be careful once you get this terminal off of here not to touch this against ground, because you'll definitely cause a lot of problems with the electrical system and leave nice weld marks everywhere. So it's got definitely enough power to make your life miserable if you don't treat it with some respect. And to get these terminals off, what you want to do is start with the negative terminal first. So we use the 13mm and just loosen these. The reason you don't want to start with the positive terminal is if you get the wrench across part of the body or ground, you'll cause a problem. And because I have this extra power source hooked up here, that's actually still a problem. So in this particular case, it didn't really matter which one that I loosened first. I still have a live circuit, but definitely just better to stick with best practices and remove the negative terminal first. And so now we'll go ahead and loosen the positive terminal. Probably going to take two hands. It's been on there for several years. These look like the wiring from the alternator. And these terminals should just twist right off. No, they're not going to. Very difficult to do with one hand. Let me go ahead and put the camera back and take that terminal off, and then we'll take out this washer bucket next. Okay, I'm all set up here, and I've got to correct an earlier statement. The side of the battery terminal, the positive terminal you want to remove first, is this larger 13mm bolt, not the 10mm that holds the alternator or charging system wiring to the terminal. That's why it wouldn't come off. As soon as I loosened the proper fastener, the terminal spread right open and came right off. It's pretty thick wire here and pretty stiff, so to avoid that coming back down in this direction when I pull the battery out, I've got this tied up with a, of course, insulated bungee cord to something on the engine. You know, this breather tube, for example, or you can use one of the air cleaner hooks, just something to keep it out of the way. It doesn't take a whole lot of force. And the same thing with the washer bottle. I've got a bungee cord keeping that out of the way to avoid it, to keep it from falling back in when I take the battery out. The washer bottle comes off very easily once you get the two terminals disconnected, because they lay over top of the washer bottle. It really just lifts up out of the car, and you can set it over on its side. They give you just enough slack in the wiring to do that without having to disconnect any of the pump wiring or the output hose. And this is actually one of the larger water bottles because it was originally the heated windshield washer system. You've got somebody capped off the heater fittings here, as well as the coolant fittings for the heater here, because the heater started leaking coolant into the washer bottle. So that might be something I'll fix next. And to check our auxiliary power source here, just want to see if I've got any power going to it at all, and I do. I've got the interior light working off the auxiliary battery, so I know I'm not going to lose the computer settings or the radio, so that's good. And now we'll come back over here, and kind of similar to a Ford battery, you've got these two mounting brackets down here with 10mm bolts that you just have to loosen up. And then the battery will, you can slide the battery forward because there's like a clip on the other side to disengage it, and it should just lift right on out. So let me go ahead and get those two brackets loose, and we'll go from there. Okay, now I got the hood finally in the 90-degree position. On these Mercedes you can do that to gain better access to the battery. I'm ready to go ahead and lift it out of there. I've got the two securing clips removed, so now there's nothing holding it out. This battery conveniently has these handles on here, so it should be fairly easy to come out of here, but it might be a little bit tight. And the secret to getting that battery out of there was to sort of tilt it up and lift it out versus moving it forward. You can see it's got this lip right here where the back mounting flange of the battery presses up against. That's why it had to be tilted. Now that the battery is completely removed, I want to clean up the battery tray. It looks like the previous batteries that were in here leaked a little bit, just like I was showing you earlier, how they kind of start leaking around these posts or the caps and kind of run down the sides. I need to clean all this up, get all the leaves out of here, and go ahead and put the new battery in. And because it's an absorbed glass matte battery versus a flooded battery, I know that this battery is not going to do that. So this damage that you see here is not going to get any worse. I really should clean up the battery tray, but don't really have time to do that today. But it still has plenty of integrity. For a car this old, that battery tray actually does not look all that bad. So let me get all up in here with a vacuum cleaner and clean all these leaves and things out of here. These are bad because it can plug up some of the drain holes for water and cause rust issues on the body. So definitely want to take advantage of the opportunity I have now and clean everything up before I go in with the new battery. Okay, I got the battery tray all cleaned up as best I can, and all the cracks and crevices down here in the corners where these like to collect that might block drain holes. And this is really just surface rust. The battery tray still has a lot of integrity, but I think at some point down the road I want to take this out and either replace it completely or recondition it, sandblast it, and put basically powder coat it black. I've got the new battery ready for installation, and I've got it sitting on a clean bag for a very good reason. If you remember before, when I was comparing batteries over near that truck, it was sitting on the ground, And what I want to avoid doing is having bits of debris or gravel or dirt stuck to the bottom of the case, and then grinding into the bottom of that case. Once it sits on the battery tray, it could potentially, in some cases, breach the case and cause a leak if it were a flooded battery. So you just want to make sure that you keep the bottom of the batteries of the new battery very clean and free of debris, as well as the battery tray, because the slight movement and vibration of that battery back and forth over time could wear a hole in the bottom of it and cause a leak that you don't want. So now we're ready to go in with the new battery, and it weighs 58 pounds, so it's not exactly light. That's basically all there is to it. The fact that you can get this hood open like that really helps out quite a bit. The engineers were really thinking when they came up with this design. Not only is the design good as far as the hood goes, but it's also good as far as the battery goes, because it's got this double firewall here that separates the battery from the hot components of the engine, that hot exhaust manifold, and keeps the battery nice and cool. So now it's basically in place and ready to go. The next thing to do is to go ahead and drop these mounting brackets in place, just like that. Just one on each side. And then go ahead and hand start the nuts. And we'll use our extension to go ahead and run them down. And let me go ahead and tighten that down and make sure this thing is in properly, which it is. Just want to make sure it's nice and square. And we'll be right back. Okay, battery's all installed mechanically. Got the brackets down there, and all the nuts are tightened up. And now it's time to put the washer bottle back in its place. I'll show you guys how that slides in, as large as it is. And it's just as easy as that. The next thing you always want to do is put on some battery protection washers. That'll keep any acid from coming up around the terminals. It's not really a big deal with the absorbed glass matte batteries, but I like to do that anyway, just as a measure of precaution. And on a flooded battery, I would definitely use the NOCO product. I'm sure you guys have seen this. It's that red spray paint looking stuff. So go ahead and take out our washers. Sometimes these are coated with chemicals, and other times they're not. And what these are going to do, especially in a flooded battery, is cover up this interface between the polypropylene case and the lead terminal. and they just fit on there just like that. Plus it kind of gives it a nice finished look. Go ahead and put our terminal down first. Normally you would put the positive terminal on first and tighten that down, and then do the negative terminal. But I've got power running to that from the battery, so it doesn't really matter. I'm going to go ahead and tighten these down and be back. Okay, the battery is all installed now. All the terminals are tightened down and all cleaned up, and I got the terminal washers installed. And just like before, I've got the voltmeter hooked up, and I still have the engine disabled. And we'll go ahead and see how this thing compares to the previous attempt at starting, and we'll also look at the voltage during starting. We'll see how it sounds, and also see how long it will crank for. Hello? Sorry about that, I had to take a phone call, but that gives me a chance to be extra hard on this battery and go for another starting attempt and see how it does. That's much better. That's performing as it should. It seems like that battery can crank the engine over all day long, although I know that it can't. No battery can. I've got good recovery. So I feel very much more confident now that this is not going to let me down on the road. And hopefully the earlier starting attempt at the beginning of the video really demonstrates how batteries tend to fail gradually over time, and to kind of show you how to use your ears to see how the engine sounds as it's cranking and for how long it cranks, to let you know that the battery is just beginning to fail, so that you're not stuck on the side of the road somewhere. I'm really impressed with these Deka AGM batteries. I think I'm going to go ahead and convert the entire fleet over to AGM versus flooded batteries. It just is the right thing to do. It makes the most sense. They're not going to leak. They're much more rugged and vibration resistant, and I've really had good luck with these batteries. I'm going to go ahead and pull my terminal alligator clip off. And as one last thing, I went ahead and used some zip ties and tied some of this wiring together here on the water bottle for the washer system. So that's nice and tight. And instead of using these older white caps for the battery that came with the original battery, I went ahead and bought a red cap, ironically enough from Chrysler, or it used to be Daimler Chrysler, but they use almost the same batteries, and that just fits in here like that. And now we have a nice finished OEM look for the battery. And if you guys want to know what the original battery looked like, there it is. That's the Mercedes-Benz original battery. And there's all the part numbers and everything, as well as the cold cranking amps. 760 versus 850 on the new battery. You can start to see some discoloration in the plastic where that acid is starting to come up right in between the case and the terminal. And you can also tell the difference between these lead terminals here that are not forged, they're somewhat porous and can absorb acid, versus the terminals on the Deka battery, which are going to remain nice and should remain nice and shiny for the life of the battery. Sorry about the interruption earlier. The stupid info-lithium battery in this camera is not made by East Penn or Deka and fails catastrophically all of a sudden without warning, especially when it's cold. So I wish Deka made batteries for cameras. But anyway, hopefully this video shows you guys how to change out the batteries in your W126 and gives you some pointers on what kind of batteries to buy. Valve regulated lead acid, or VRLA, or AGM as it's also called, I think is the way to go. It just represents the best technology you can get, and should last you a long time. There's no reason why this battery can't last me 10 years. One last thing that you want to do is take the opportunity to cut out these circles that represent the month and year when the battery was installed, because down the road you will forget, and it's just nice to be able to simply look at it and see how old the battery is. So anyway, I'm going to move on to go back to the 1970 Mercedes and continue along with the brake job for it.